Going live with MSNBC. That's not good. Can't be.
Yes, it's going to be a close election in Georgia because Walker has the backing of the Republicans. Now you ask, why are Republicans backing this man who's so clearly unintelligent, who so clearly doesn't have independent thoughts? But that's actually the reason.
All right, we'll continue with Eli Mistall in a couple of minutes here. Anyway, welcome to GAMcast for August the 1st, 2022. It is a cloudy day. Hopefully, we don't get any more rain. We've gotten tons of rain in Atlanta here recently. And that was Eli Mistall talking about the Herschel Walker, Raphael Warnock race out there. And I want to talk about that in the context of a broader thing I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time. We're going to get to that in a minute. And this is the headline from The Hill. Senate Democrats say GOP roster is, quote, full of flawed and deeply damaged candidates. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Pelosi's trip. We're going to talk about Jon Stewart, the PACT Act, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, and a bunch of other things. If we can get to it, we shall see. Another slow news day. I think it's going to be that way for the entirety of August. The recess for the Senate and the House, I believe they both operate on the same schedule, starts August 8th, so a week from today. They're going to try to get these last few things pushed through and passed if they can, and then they're going to go basically on recess for about a month and campaign, do some other things. So I think you're going to see a lot of slow news days coming. How can you tell us a slow news day if you don't read the news and don't pull it up and read it, systematically like I do? Well, one is you can tell your podcast or your live stream or whatever you listen to, they'll have a lot more guests on. They'll read a lot more questions from the listeners. They will tend to shorten their podcasts. So it just, go and look and see Shapiro, whoever you listen to, Jesse Kelly, anybody you want to pick out there. Typically, they'll have shorter shows because of the fact that there's less to talk about out there. But if you know where to look, there's actually tons of stuff to talk about. So that's why I was able to get to this story about the Senate Democrats say GOP roster is full of flawed and deeply damaged candidates. Now, you may say to yourself, the Democrats probably always say that. Why is that a headline? Well, it's really not a headline. But they've been saying that for a while, and this is all part of the hoax that is the media, the Democrat cabal that's been going on now for basically really, pre-Obama, but certainly in the Obama years, they just tilted and went on steroids. And now they've got, 12, 13, 14, 15 years of, people that have been raised. And so now they haven't shifted over to being all Democrat all the time. They just don't know anything better. There was a Pew poll, I hadn't had a chance to cover it. I may cover it this week. We'll see. That talked about, I think 56% of quote-unquote Democrats think it's irresponsible to even tell the other side. You got the exact reverse on the GOP, which is, I think it was 65% of GOP quote-unquote reporters, whatever you want to call them, they felt like it was irresponsible not to give the other side to the GOP. And that's what happens when you get a generation or two of people raised on this type of stuff. But getting back to Eli Mistall, so this is an old ruse the Democrats have been pulling. They've been doing this for years. Just like when we get to the Inflation Reduction Act, it's just tax and spend. And we got the whole chip thing they did last week. It's just tax and spend. It's one of the things that Democrats have always believed. They always believed that they're better at spending your money than you are. It's just that simple. It really isn't more complicated than that. So they feel like they should be able to tax your money and then spend it for you. The problem is that, with the New Deal, it was a lot easier to say, yeah, we're going to tax a bunch of people, and then we're going to give people in Appalachia running water and electricity. And people were like, well, that's not a bad trade. Sure, I'll pay a little bit of taxation for people to get something. Now it's harder to say what you're actually going to do because you've already done all that stuff. And so the government just can't come in and do tangible things. So you've got to fool them and figure out a different way to get, wrench the money from their pockets. But getting back to this story about Herschel Walker, there's nothing flawed about Herschel Walker. There's nothing flawed about Oz. If they want, listen, and I'm not an Oz fan, and what I can't really understand, and I've been following this for a while, but Jack Posobiec and some other people, they are just all over Oz. I understand he's a rhino. I get it. I understand he got Trump's endorsement, and then as soon as he got it, he ran from Trump like Carl Lewis. I get it. But, folks, it's like Reagan said, try to elect the best Republican candidate you can in an otherwise non-Republican area. So I really don't understand why you want to give that seat to Fetterman. Fetterman he's not even a New Deal Democrat. He's like this new age neo-Marxist Democrat. I don't know why you want to give that seat away. I really don't understand it. I mean, they continue to attack Oz and pile on. That's not going to help. And I don't understand, so what? He's in the Senate for 6 years, and he votes like Mitt Romney. It's better than Fetterman. But anyway, we'll figure it out. Maybe at some point Posobiec will tell us, anyway. But there's nothing flawed about him. And you just think about it. You don't even need to hear it from people who've been watching it for years and know how they do this. I mean, just think about it. And there's lots about Herschel Walker's story you could tell, right? I mean, a running back turned businessman, now successful, the first Republican. Have you heard this yet? He's since Reconstruction, folks, which doesn't count. He's the first black Republican to run in Georgia. I haven't heard that. Everywhere some Democrat is the first anything to do anything, they trumpet it from the mountaintops. Herschel Walker does that. Nobody cares. Nobody even mentions it, right? They talk about the fact that he's had some mental health issues. Well, A, in Democrat circles, who hasn't? And then B, why not talk about the fact that he's overcome it? Believe me, if he were a Democrat, that's what you'd be hearing about, is that this brave person has come forward, overcome whatever disability is, and now he's gone on to get the nomination of same. You could do the same thing for Oz. I got 40 minutes. I'm already 6 minutes in. I don't have time to belabor this, but you get the point. So don't fall for this idea that they're flawed candidates. This is something they've been doing for years and years and years and years and years. And the idea is, look, they know that the Democrats are not going to stray from the herd. Not one time, not going to happen, right? So they know that's not going to happen. All this is designed to do is to pick away a few people on our side that are, believe in the Constitution, that believe in the rule of law, that otherwise would not. I mean, we aren't Republicans necessarily, but we're going to vote for people that talk about things that are inclusive for all, which is the Republican brand right now, right? You follow these rules, you follow the Constitution, you believe in the rule of law, there you go. We're going to vote for you, right? We're not for basically picking winners and losers and spending our money, especially money we don't have, right? So that's the way we're going to vote. Well, the way they're going to pick you apart is they're going to say, oh, well, look at how flawed he is. I mean, look at how flawed Oz is. He doesn't even really live in Pennsylvania. As if people cared when Hillary Clinton ran for senator in New York. I mean, for crying out loud, everybody knows they're from Arkansas. I mean, Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas when I was growing up for like 85 years or something. I mean, he literally was governor of Arkansas, screwed up too bad, and they unelected him, and then he basically went on an apology tour, which at the time was one of the many times he reinvented himself. Literally went on the camera and said, hey, you know what, Arkansas voters, I messed up. I was wrong. Give me another chance, and they did. And so it was broken up. But I think he was governor of Arkansas for a long time, and they were Arkansas, and then a few years after he leaves the White House, right in 2000, she's running for senator in New York. You didn't hear a word about the fact that she was a carpetbagger. Nothing. But anyway, so I could go on, but this is an old trick. And again, so I just want you to fully understand the trick. And the other thing is, it's not necessarily designed to get people to vote for Fetterman. It's designed to keep you at home and not be enthusiastic, right? And heck, you might even cross over and vote for the other guy. We shall see. But let's continue to hear what Eli Misdahl has to say here about the flawed candidates. And then I'm going to give you one other thing that applies to Herschel that doesn't apply to Oz or some of these people out in Arizona and other places.
Walker's going to do what he's told. And that's what Republicans like. That's what Republicans want from their Negroes, to do what they're told. And Walker presents exactly as a person who lacks independent thoughts, lacks an independent agenda, lacks an independent ability to grasp policies, and he's just going to go in there and vote like Mitch McConnell tells him to vote. And remember, this has worked for the GOP in the South already. Tommy Tuberville, who right now is probably the dumbest person in the United States Senate, right? All he does is do what Mitch McConnell tells him to do. And so the GOP likes these candidates that aren't able to kind of think for themselves, because that means that it basically means that Mitch McConnell gets 3 votes every time he shows up to work, as opposed to just his own.
Now, folks, that racist rant would be sickening if it were said about anybody. Folks, you see a lot of people moving away from what Nancy Pelosi tells them to do. See a lot of Democrats flying the coop on Chuck Schumer out there. You hear any evidence of any kind there other than a smear job? Let me tell you a little bit about what's going on there, a little bit about what's going on, and it's a story. I've been sick for like a couple weeks. I'm still not even really 100%. But so I've been kind of working on this, and I hadn't had a chance to put it together. But there are roughly 33 Senate seats up this year, right? That's the way it typically works, right? Because you have a third of the Senate up every 2 years because they get 6 years. So about every other year, you've got maybe 34. But anyway, so there's typically 33. And I'm going to go through and see how many of those candidates that are up, especially that are non-incumbents, because you can't really do much about the incumbency. But the ones that are non-incumbency, how many are people of color? And do the same thing on the House side. It's going to take a little while to research it and put the numbers together. But when you do, what you're going to see is you have a lot more persons of color running on both sides of the aisle. Okay, you see a lot more persons of color getting the seat for the Democrats and a lot more persons of color getting the seat for the Republican. What that tells you is a lot more people are going in and voting based on color. The problem for the Democrats is they can't have the Republicans doing that. That's why they got to go after the Herschel Walkers of the world with reckless abandon. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and try to talk about somebody's dumb and somebody's not dumb like he did, but you always have to understand they have to be very, very careful about that branding. That's why they went after Clarence Thomas. That's why they never gave Condoleezza Rice or I forget the fellow who was the Secretary of Defense, Colin Powell. Why they never gave Colin Powell his due, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just Eli Misdahl carrying on the sort of disgusting myth that they've been carrying on for some time. But anyway, one other thing, and this was up in my Twitter feed. I never heard of this person. Her name is Hannah Arendt, and she apparently grew up in Nazi Germany. I don't think she was Jewish. I think she was adopted by a Jewish family. I did a little bit of reading before I went live, but not much. It really wasn't that important. Her quote's more important. But I just want to give you a little bit of history so you can understand the quote. She grew up in Nazi Germany, which we've already talked about. It was a leftist regime. A lot of people will try to say it was the right and far right. It depends on how you define things. I listened to Ben Shapiro's Sunday special yesterday, which I highly recommend. Was a couple of quote-unquote conservatives or whatever they call themselves. Shapiro is a conservative. I forget the name of the fellow was on there. Doesn't matter. They were talking about the idea of conservatives being liberals like Thomas Jefferson, and then conservatives basically being people like Ronald Reagan, who basically wanted to, quote, conserve, and the differentiation between the two and how they overlap and how they don't. So it depends on how you want to give labels. And one of the things people do a lot is they'll just use labels to mean different things that don't really mean things at all. Example, they've changed the definition of recession, and then after they change the definition of recession, they change the definition of definition in Wikipedia and all this stuff. So we know that one side doesn't believe in words meaning particularly what they mean. Right. But if you go and you look at it and you say, look, the left to me is defined as the government controlling what people are permitted to do or not permitted to do. And the right to me is the government being limited and not being able to tell people what to do. Right. If that's sort of the differentiation and you believe in small government, then the American system of government would be on the quote unquote right. And then the communists and the socialists and the Nazis, and those folks in Italy, they would all be on the left, right? And then you would have people like they call them democratic socialists, but there's no such thing. You can't have socialism with democracy. I mean, it's just, you want to talk about an oxymoron. But those people would be sort of leftist, but more centrist. And that, in other words, you get to sort of elect, and this would be in quotes, the people that get to tell you what to do. But it still wouldn't be. Anyway, so it depends on how you look at it, but it's always fascinating to listen to people who grew up in this. So she grew up, she was adopted, she grew up, she eventually had to flee Nazi Germany because she was, again, I believe she was raised by Jewish people, and then she also did some works that they didn't care for. Eventually landed in Paris, had some problems in Paris, and then eventually got to the USA, where she wrote a lot of sort of anti-leftist stuff. But anyway, this quote was on the Twitter feed. I thought it was apropos of what's going on. The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists. And if you are worried about where we are, whether or not we're in totalitarian rule or not, that quote is exactly right. And you've heard many iterations of this type of quote. People oftentimes don't get it, right? It's not the person that's in your face saying, hey, I want to do this and I want to do that and I want to do this and I want to do that. It's the people that no longer can be dealt with in reality. And we see one side doing this all the time. So with that in mind, let's get to, again, this was Mark Hamill, but it doesn't matter who it really was. But Mark Hamill is one of these persons who he no longer can distinguish between fact and fiction, truth, reality. He has no idea, and it's simple how he can do it because he tweeted this out. Here's Jon Stewart fact-checking Ted Cruz, and we all should be grateful. I know I am. Now, again, this is Jon Stewart. I'm going to let it. And by the way, folks, spoiler alert, there's a lot of profanity in this. If you don't want to hear profanity, you need to scroll forward about 5 minutes because I don't have the ability to beep Jon Stewart here. So anyway, he is very profane, which should tell you a lot about his argument. So this is all about the PACT Act. I'm not going to get into the PACT Act. Essentially, covered it a little bit on Friday, but I've done some more research on it and I've heard some people. Essentially, they wanted to set aside some money to help veterans that have been exposed to toxic elements as a result of these burn pits in the Middle Eastern wars. That's kind of the 30,000-foot view. Now, turns out that the bill originally passed, looked like it was going to fly through, and then a bunch of Republicans turned against it, so it didn't have enough to get past the filibuster, right, which it needs. Now, the reason the Republicans say they didn't vote for it is it creates allegedly another $400 billion in a slush fund. Now, that shouldn't come as a surprise, knowing what the Democrats do when we get to the Inflation Act. We're going to see a lot of that. So we're going to go, this doesn't sound crazy. Now, the Democrats' retort is no, 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 no. This is in retaliation for Manchin caving on Build Back Better, which has now been rebranded the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. That's the reason you're doing this. You're for it, now you're against it, and you're against it because it's spite. That's what they say. Now, we're going to listen to what Jon Stewart has to say, his rebuttal of Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is going to give the standard Republican rebuttal, which I've just given you, and then Jon Stewart is going to debunk it. Now, when you do that, I want you to listen to the debunk, okay? And I want you to think about, does this really debunk it? Is this a rational person? Is this person dealing in reality? Are they dealing in things that are true or not? And before I do that, I want to tell you there's a lot of people have been playing games with this too, but if you go look, in fact, the CBO scored them differently. So the one that was originally brought up in front of the House got a different score than the one that was brought up in the Senate recently. So what's the reason for the different score? You can figure that out for yourself. Unfortunately, I tried to go down that rabbit hole, and as per usual, whenever you can change the definition of things midstream, when you try to go down, then now people have confused whether the CBO score was different. But anyway, without further ado, here is Ted Cruz first responding to Jon Stewart, and then Jon Stewart responding to Ted Cruz. We'll come talk about it in a minute.
Yeah, look, I didn't see Jon Stewart. He's actually quite funny. Look, he's talking about the PACT Act, which is a bill I support. It's a bill most senators support.
Oh, hello. I'm Jon Stewart. Apparently. Quite funny. And I'm awfully interested in what Theodore Cruz is about to say about the PACT Act. Go on.
But what the dispute is about is the Democrats played a budgetary trick, which is they took $400 billion in discretionary spending and they shifted it to mandatory.
One thing, what Ted Cruz is describing is inaccurate, not true. Bullshit! This is no trick. Everything in the government is either mandatory or discretionary spending, depending on which bucket they feel like putting it in. The whole place is basically a fucking shell game. And he's pretending that this is some new thing that the Democrats pulled out, stuck into the bill, and snuck it past one Ted Cruz. Now, I'm not a big city, Harvard-educated lawyer, but I can read. It's always been mandatory spending so that the government can't just cut off their funding at any point. No trick, no gimmick, been there the whole fucking time.
And so it's just part of...
Okay, so again, I mean, he got a chance to rebut, and did he bring up a CBO score? Did he bring up a quote from somebody in this? No, he just ran his mouth for a minute and went back and forth with Ted Cruz. Easy enough to solve. Pat Toomey went on the floor over the weekend and is going to offer an amendment that corrects what he claims is the problem. And what Jon Stewart doesn't understand, again, because he doesn't care to understand or pay attention, everything is discretionary or mandatory. But what he doesn't understand is that shifting something from discretionary to mandatory is a huge deal. Now, unfortunately for us, and I don't want to go into a budget thing, I get requests all the time for people to go into budget stuff. Folks, it is so beyond repair. And that's why I keep talking about this stuff. We've got to fix the communication infrastructure. Because if Jon Stewart can rebut me by just saying the F-bomb a couple of times and saying BS and being funny, then there's nothing you can fix about going in and looking at numbers. But the long and the short of it is, folks, that a huge percentage of the government today is mandatory spending, right? So you got your entitlements, you got military spending, which is more or less mandatory. You've got the debt, the inflation or the interest on the debt you've got to pay, all those things. And then what's discretionary is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And what the Democrats have been doing has been trying to make what's mandatory more and more mandatory. So the real distinction here between the two sides, again, if we're just being judged here, is look, one side says you've turned $400 billion from discretionary, which means we might or we might not have to spend it, right? In other words, we could try to save it in a given year if, say, in 2 years the Republicans take the presidency, or say in 6 months they take the House. They could take that $400 billion and all of them say we're not going to spend it because it's discretionary. See, they can't do that with Social Security. They can't do that with Medicare, Medicaid. They can't do that with the interest on the debt. They can't do that. It's mandatory, you see. So that's what the dispute is. So why don't we stick to what the dispute is and try and prove it and not prove it? Or as Pat Toomey said, I'm just going to put it up there and say it's discretionary. You can vote for it. You won't. I don't know how the vote came out. I don't think they've had it yet. We shall see. But they continue.
Out of control spending from the left.
They want to buy Hunter Biden cocaine.
So now, typical, now we're on to Hunter Biden. So he mocks you, a typical thing the left does all the time. No facts, no data. Now we're on to Hunter Biden. What's Hunter Biden got to do with this? Ted Cruz didn't mention Hunter Biden. So, I mean, I could go on with this. I don't really want to spend a ton of time because there's other important stories out there. But, folks, this whole PACT Act controversy is, and I could have brought to you, by the way, instead of using Mark Hamill, I just thought he was a good example. I could have done the same thing with Amy Klobuchar, the so-called moderate. Remember when she's the moderate? I think the problem with her is that she yelled at her staff. But other than that, she's moderate, you see. She's a very moderate person. And she believes in this type of stuff. She believes there's no dealing with people who talk like this. And again, when we heard the quote earlier from the person from World War II, this is exactly how totalitarians operate, right? There is no reality. It is what we say it is. And if you don't like it, then we just talk in platitudes and nonsense, or we mock you, or we shift the debate, which one side is doing that with the PACT Act. One side is not. Right? So we'll see. Anyway, a couple stories I did want to get to that are, I think, more important. So the Alex Jones trial is going on. I tried to live stream it, but it really, it's unfortunate. It just, you can watch it live, but it's really not a lot you can do there in terms of live streaming it, just because he's been so ransacked that they've basically struck his pleadings and held him in default. And what that means is it's only supposed to be sparingly used, but the trial court does have the power under certain circumstances to, as a sanction, to hold you and to strike your answer. Therefore, you're in default. If you're in default, you're not permitted to provide a defense. Now, by American law, which won't be the law much longer at the rate we're going, but under American law, you can never, quote unquote, default to damages, right? Unless they're so-called liquidated. And these damages aren't liquidated. Liquidated means it's an amount that's not in doubt. So, for example, if I were to borrow $20,000 to go buy a new car, right, if they sued me and then I was found to be in default, the number's not in dispute. I mean, I borrowed $20,000. I owe $20,000. When you start talking about pain and suffering or emotional damage or physical damage, that's not liquidated. We don't know what that number is. So you still have the right to go to a jury and challenge it, but it's a limited right? You can only challenge the amounts that are at play here. So it doesn't really play very well because and the judge also is very, very unfair. She's not, I mean, you probably understood that by the time she's striking somebody's answer, she's not particularly a fair judge out there. So she's being very, very lenient with what she'll allow the plaintiffs to ask and very, very harsh on the witnesses that have come forward, which so far have been people that work for Alex Jones. But anyway, there's something bigger going on in the Alex Jones trial, and the New York Times is becoming like Juan Williams. The New York Times literally is becoming a Juan Williams type thing. And a Juan Williams is somebody who gets their talking points from the regime or from the people in power, which is now the left of the Democrat Party, and they will basically come out and write an article or a puff piece, and when you read it, you go, "Oh my God, this is what they're trying to do now." And they'll just say the quiet part out loud, you know. So anyway, so lies for profit. Can Sandy Hook parents shut Alex Jones down? A hefty financial verdict this week could dissuade other politically driven liars, but the path forward is uncertain and the legal battle takes a toll. Now, she's already judged him because she says he's lying. All right, when viral lies harm private people, are they are the courts their best refuge? A trial to decide how much the conspiracy broadcaster Alex Jones must pay a Sandy Hook family for defaming them attempts to answer that question. Now, folks, you can already tell where this journalist, quote-unquote journalist, is coming from, and maybe she's an opinion columnist. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt and say this is an opinion column. But, folks, how do you defame somebody by saying what happened to them is not true and they're crisis actors? I mean, you get to crisis actor, maybe you're closer to defaming somebody, but you have to identify them enough. But anyway, so it goes through it. It describes what's going on in the Alex Jones. Last year, Mr. Jones lost a series of Sandy Hook defamation cases by default, setting the stage for the damages trials. Now, that should tell you something when you're reading if you have legal training, right? Lost them by default. So typically the way default works is you're served with process, okay? You do not answer. That's called a default. Now you're in default. Now, under American law, again, not going to be much longer, but under American law, opening a default has been a very easy thing to do. And especially if it was a result of mistake or simple negligence. Typically, in America, we want to hear the case on the merits, right? That's very different from the British system. The British system, which we broke away from, is quite the opposite, right? Much easier to find a fault, much harder to get rid of it. And the reason is because they don't necessarily want things on the merits. That should tell you something. Why would you not want to have a trial on the merits? I understand if somebody willfully defaults or defaults so badly that there's no real merits here to go forward. But anyway, so again, I've already told you it was a sanction for so-called discovery violations, which in and of itself should be suspicious, but we'll let that go aside. You scroll down here and you get down to the bottom, or really the part I want to get to. Oh, come on, where is it? Where is it? Come on. Continue. She's talking about all these trials. Oh, come on. It was midway through. You always have to get midway through with these people before you can get to it. Yeah. Lawyers for the Sandy Hook family say a verdict expected this week in the first trial could send a signal to other conspiracy purveyors about the cost of online lies and set into motion a chain of events that could shut InfoWars down. Right? Still, the path forward is not clear. On Friday, Mr. Jones put InfoWars' parent company, Free Speech Systems, into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which usually automatically halts all pending litigation. Free Speech Systems, however, requested that the bankruptcy court lift the automatic stay so the trial in progress could continue to a verdict. The motion is set for a hearing on Monday morning in bankruptcy court in Victoria, Texas. That would be today. Judge Maya Gura-Gamble of the Travis District Court indicated the trial would proceed. Right? Lawyers for the family say a big award this week, along with the bankruptcy, could threaten InfoWars operations, but many details about Jones's current finances are murky. Folks, here's the point that I wanted to make in reading this article, okay? What they're talking about here is another way, right here. They talk about expected this week could send other conspiracy purveyors about the cost of online lies. This is just an end around of the system to attack people you don't agree with. And I'm not here to defend Alex Jones, right? I don't want another hit from, and I don't know if I told you folks on Friday or not, but I got one of my videos taken down. I appealed it, and they denied the appeal. So I officially now have one of my videos that was up on YouTube taken down. And this is how they operate, folks. And I've been telling you this for a long time. You have to sort of live it to really, truly appreciate it. But it was my video. I did a video about the January 6th committee's 187 minutes is a lie. And it was up for about, I don't know, a week or 10 days. It was up for a while. And I got up this weekend. I got an email from YouTube saying it violated about spreading misinformation about fraud being enough to overturn the 2020 election. And I protested it, and I said, this doesn't even deal with that. It deals with the 187 minutes and compares to the Washington Post. The appeal was denied. They said, we checked it, and it does. No indication of where in the video it does, no indication of what particularly needed to be taken down. And I've had several copyright claims that have all been reversed when I appealed them. And the difference, so you understand, is with copyright claims, they'll tell you, here's the actual from here to here is what they're saying violates the thing. And they'll also give you one other option. Option A is you can just remove that part and put the video back up there, right? When you do apparently, and this is the first time I've ever been warned, so I have no idea. And folks, you'll know that several times on these podcasts and stuff, I try to make sure I say I'm not talking about that. because I know that you're not supposed to do it. I did it innocently if I did it at all. And I've listened to it again, and I didn't do it. So I don't know what they're talking about. It's still up on Rumble if you want to listen to it, by the way. I think if you go to rumble.com and then put in Great American Male 187 minutes, it'll still come up. But I don't talk about the election in there. I just don't talk about it. So I don't know how it happened. But again, this is what the system that they believe in, right? And it's just bizarre to think as an American, you can flag me for something. Here's what you claim it is. You don't tell me where it is in the video. You just say, and it was a 6-minute video for crying out loud. I listened to the entire thing. I couldn't find it. Then you appeal it and say, here's why, whatever the computer is that flagged it, right? And it makes me think a computer didn't flag it, because if a computer would have flagged it, would have flagged it a long time before it did. My guess is that somebody human flagged it, which is why when you protested it, it didn't make a difference. But then they don't. Then they just come back and they say, yeah, we checked and you violated it, and we don't have to say where, we don't have to say why, and we know you're disappointed, but we have to keep people safe. What does that even mean? How are they not safe? I mean, don't listen to the video if you don't like it. I mean, it's bizarre. I'm going to keep you safe because you might press a video that you wanted to see and then you saw it. But anyway, getting back to this Alex Jones trial, this is just another way around things. Just so you understand, folks, very simple. Like, they don't like what he has to say, right? And so we're now going to try to figure out another way to hold him accountable. First, we go after your advertisers. Well, that didn't work out, right? Apparently making money anyway, right? When we go through the FEC and other communications, that didn't work. So now we're just going to destroy the legal system and make up these brand new cases where you get to you have this strenuous claim of defamation. And then you've got a strenuous claim of defamation under the law, and we're going to hold you in default. Oh, okay. And then we're going to have a damages trial and see what happens. And now they're talking about interrupting the bankruptcy process. We'll see how all that works out. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure you understood what's going on. This is another attack, and the New York Times is basically broadcasting. And again, folks, if you're okay with them ruining an entire system, again, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, then, again, I don't need agreement. I just want us to be clear about what's going on. So this is from Sarah Lynch. Sarah Lynch, a lot of people seem to think she's been covering the January 6th stuff. And a lot of people seem to think that Sarah Lynch is somehow, she's with AP or Reuters. I think she's with AP, but she may be with Reuters because this is a Reuters article there. Don't know, don't care. Anyway, a lot of people say that she's kind of like, you can't tell which side she's on, so she's more of an authoritarian source. I don't have any problem telling which side this person is on. It's pretty straightforward to me which side she's on. But I will say this. I do think she does a decent job of giving you factual information. So here's some factual information about what's going on today. Texas far-right militia member faces sentencing over January 6th Capitol riot. An associate of the far-right 3%ers militia could be sentenced to more than a decade in prison on Monday, that would be today, for joining the riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, while armed and threatening his own children if they ratted him out to the FBI. Guy Reifert of Wiley, Texas, was convicted by a jury in March of 5 felony charges, including bringing a gun into the Capitol grounds and obstructing an official proceeding. The federal guidelines recommended a prison sentence of 9 to 11.25 years for this crime, prosecutors say. Reifert, who was 49 at the time of the conviction, never entered the Capitol, but video evidence showed him egging on the crowd and leading other rioters up to the stairs outside the building. His emotionally charged trial included testimony of his estranged son, Jackson, who brought his father to tears as he told the jury about his father threatened him if he dared call the FBI. He said, "If you turn me in, you're a traitor," Jackson Reifert told jurors, and traitors get shot. Reifert was the first Capitol rioter to go to trial in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. To date, federal prosecutors have prevailed and won convictions in all but one of 13 trials tied to the Capitol attack. The only one that hasn't been won was tried to a judge, which, frankly, people ought to start thinking about that. I do believe it was a Trump-appointed judge, though. So anyway, federal prosecutors are asking U.S. District Court Judge Dabney Frederick to sentence Reifert to 15 years, more than the U.S. sentencing guidelines recommend, citing Reifert's crime as being, quote, calculated to influence or affect the conduct of government by intimidation or coercion. Folks, anyway, I just want you to understand what's going on here. Again, the guy was armed. I don't see a charge about being armed. Okay, again, his charges, right, are having a gun and obstructing an official proceeding. Okay, so you were present with a firearm you didn't use in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Doesn't sound like you just weren't supposed to have it on the grounds, I guess. I don't know. I didn't look up the indictment. and obstructing an official proceeding, which we've never understood it to be protest until this day. So the federal guidelines, which, folks, you got to understand, one of the things I was against all this, we don't get to talk about this a lot, but I was against these federal guidelines and increasing sentencing for things because this is what happens. You end up sending people to prison for a long time. You end up being a police state. Anyway, they say it's 9 to 11.25 years, okay? I want you to understand the government wants almost 30% more, 15 years. For 4.5 hours, he didn't even enter, okay? If you think you're living in a police state, you might be right. Anyway, out-of-state Democrats pay millions to influence Kansas elections because abortion is on the ballot. Many Kansans may not realize that the votes they cast on Tuesday, that would be tomorrow, may have heavily influenced by out-of-state abortion apologists. Kansas headed to the polls Tuesday to vote on the proposed Value Them Both constitutional amendment that seeks to overturn the Kansas Supreme Court's decision in Hodes versus Nasser and Smith that declared the state constitution guarantees a fundamental right to abortion. We've been covering this issue a lot in a lot of other contexts, but I want you to understand what's going on here because it happens in a lot of contexts. It happens in the voting context. It happens now in the abortion context, right? If you don't like it when constitutionalism happens, right? So the Supreme Court in Dobbs overturns federal right to abortion. Then what do? Well, first, if they're already in a blue state, they say they yawn, right? B, if you're a red state, they go say, well, got nothing to lose. Let's see if the state Supreme Court will declare it a right in an otherwise red, very red state. Oh, they will? How nice. Now the people are trying to overturn the Supreme Court, and guess what? Here we go. Many Kansans may not realize, however, that the votes they cast on Tuesday may have been heavily influenced by out-of-state abortion apologists who contributed a whopping 71% of the $6.54 million spent to lead the group challenging against the amendment. We shall see what happens with the amendment out there, folks. But I just want you to understand the Dems and the left, they're nationalizing everything. Okay, all right, here is from Senate.gov, the Democrats. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Just want you to understand what they're doing. They are raising $739 billion according to them. 15% corporate minimum tax is about half of it, $313 million. Folks, if you don't understand that you tax corporations, that's basically a tax on us. I can't help you, but I just want you to know it. Prescription drug pricing reform. So they're going to basically not pay $288 billion that they otherwise would have to pay for drugs. You think those drug companies are just going to go, oh, yeah, sure, we're going to take less for the drug, no problem. No, they're going to get out of the business and stop making it. So then in a couple of years, you'll have to go back around and figure out a way for the government to subsidize that. IRS tax enforcement, they think they're going to earn $124 billion, but they got billions and billions and billions and billions in here, right, for them to go after those people. So I don't know where your net gain comes from. $14 billion in a carried interest loophole. Folks, the carried interest loophole basically means instead of me getting a check out of a deal, I'll just take an interest in stock or an interest in some assets of the company, and then later when they're sold, I get to take them as capital gains. It's not a loophole. It's the law. I don't know why they decided it was the law years ago, but it is. Now they're going to get rid of it. And again, you think those people are just going to go, oh, geez, you're going to take my $14 billion and I'm just going to let it go? No, they're going to figure out a way to get that $14 billion. So it's a temporary savings at best. Anyway, the rest of it is spent, or probably, it says right here, $433 billion are spent on energy security and climate change. What has it got to do with inflation? The rest of it is an Affordable Care Act extension, $64 billion. And then $300 billion in deficit reduction? Interesting. We shall see how that turns out, folks. But if you believe that act has anything to do with inflation, good luck. Pelosi to visit Taiwan despite warnings. Folks, I called this earlier just like I called Ukraine and Russia. Folks, she has no business going over there. That should send red flags. Why is she trying to provoke China? I don't know. But sooner or later, we're going to have to start sending money to Taiwan, or we're going to somehow get involved over there, and that's going to lead to Democrat buddies getting money and power, okay? And folks, in case you have been following along, and I've been saying for a long time, don't count on those Republicans' chickens coming home to roost in November. So the congressional ballot has narrowed into real clear politics, which tends to be more Republican-friendly, 2-1. 538 this morning. The Republicans that had about a 54% chance of taking the Senate, but about a couple weeks ago this morning, 44% chance. Folks, they're nationalizing everything. The stuff they're doing is working. I wouldn't be counting on that House or that Senate, but you need the Senate especially. Anyway, you are now all caught up to date on the news of the day, and if you like this live stream, I hope you will tune back in tomorrow.